Steak Bites, where we carve out space for meaningful conversations that go beyond the grill. I'm Kara Smith, your host and fellow enthusiast for all things tasteful and fulfilling. Today, we're diving into leadership, resilience, and the power of ownership with Jamie Cochran from Echelon Front. As a key instructor in leadership development, Jamie has dedicated her career to teaching individuals and teams how to take control of their circumstances and step up in every aspect of life. From the boardroom to the ranch, the principles of extreme ownership apply everywhere. And today we're going to break it down. Welcome, Jamie.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Let's dive into your journey.
Yeah. So I was in higher education. I was a programs director at San Diego State. At the time, my husband was in the military. He was at SEAL Team 1. He served alongside Leif Babin, who's our co-founder and president of Echelon Front. And I had left my career to support my husband, as we women do at times. And he was getting out of military. He went to go to business school. So I had a 2-year stint. I was home with my kids while he was going to business school and kind of taking that time to figure out what's the next step. Where do I want to go? What do I want to do with my career? I loved working on a college campus, but was just kind of looking for a little more autonomy. I wanted to be a part of something and help build something and find value and maybe something different than what my career had been up until that point. And lo and behold, Leif came out to Boston, had a great conversation with my husband, was actually trying to recruit him to Echelon Front back when it was just the two, Leif and Jocko as the co-founders. And they had this vision for what Echelon Front would someday be. They were in the process of writing the book that obviously everyone now knows as Extreme Ownership. And over dinner, we were having this conversation, and my husband was already committed to another consultancy. And Leif left our house, and that night I just had this thought. I thought, you know what? I might as well just throw my hat in the ring, because what he was building was really fascinating to me. So I sent him a random email that night and said, hey, I know you were here to talk to Flynn, but I'm kind of in a transition phase. And if there's support that I could offer in the meantime, I'd love to just see how I could add value. And that started a couple weeks later as a part-time, basically an administrative assistant position, with no real clarity on what that would someday be. So I took a little bit of a risk, but it obviously paid off. I've been here now at Echelon Front for almost 11 years, and I've had the extreme honor of getting to be a part of the growth of Echelon Front and serve alongside Leif and Jocko. So it all started with just a dinner conversation and an email, and here we are.
It's funny how that happens. You know, when you have those conversations, you put yourself out there. You're open to exploring that. And one of the principles that you guys talk about a lot is your ego. You set your ego aside enough to be willing to look at those opportunities and have that kind of mindset about it. I always love hearing that story.
It definitely took me putting my ego aside, because I had a position in my previous role where I had a staff of people. I was the advisor to a student board of 60. So I was kind of, moving along in my career path, and joining Echelon Front was several steps backwards. I was now, with a startup company doing very basic admin tasks. There was nobody else. It was me, Leif, and Jocko. And it took my ego to put in a box in order to focus on those things and create value in some of the more, let's just call them kind of meaningless tasks that are required when you're building something. So the money I was making didn't cover childcare, that I needed in order to do the job well. So we had to put some parameters in place. Hey, we're going to do this. I put a timeline for myself. But I took the risk. I was open to the opportunity. And then I just decided at every step, I'm going to look for how I can add value. And over time, those things compounded and opened the door for other opportunities and other, chances to be a part of this mission. So it does take putting our ego in a box, because if I had let my ego speak for me in that moment, I never would have taken that job. I would have put myself sort of above these admin tasks. And that would have been a huge mistake, because I would have missed out on the opportunity that I get now with Echelon Front.
Absolutely. I can echo that in my career. I graduated with a master's degree, and then I started working in more of I wouldn't even say administrative, but it was a very base level type of role, but it was like that introductory role into the industry, where you knew you could meet so many different people from different walks of life. And it did take a little bit of that ego check of this is where we're going to start and see where the opportunities come from. I actually would like to dive into the ego piece of this a little bit, because most of the time as women, I would say, and a lot of, we're going to gear around some of Women's History Month. Like, I love being able to highlight some of the women within the CCB community, which is part of this conversation. But typically, we may not think of ourselves of having an ego, I would say, as women, as much as maybe a man would. Could you shed some light on that? Like, we both literally just talked about our egos, and here we are saying most of the time maybe women have less of an ego. What would you say to that?
I would wholeheartedly disagree. I would say that if we're going to make some generalizations, men's egos might be on more display than women. So maybe that's what gives us this insight that women's egos aren't much of a factor. But as a mom, oh my gosh, my ego is at play every single day with my children. And I recognize the way my ego, the subtle little ways in which my ego tries to convince me of, actions or steps that I would take that are not in my best interest, or certainly not in the best interest of the people around me. So I think we have to be very intentional, as women and men across the board, to recognize when our ego is impacting the decisions that we're making, which I'm sorry to say is nearly every single day. Every decision we're making, our ego is there trying to convince us to go one way and trying to convince us, hey, you're right. You need to make sure that other person knows you're right. You need to win this argument. You need to dig in on this piece of it. They don't understand. Whatever it might be, our ego is playing that game constantly. We say a lot at Echelon Front, like, your ego loves you. And your ego loves you so much, it will love you to death. It will impact every relationship that you have, every decision that you make. And if you let it, it will totally tear away at the opportunities that you have in your life. So we really have to get better at putting our ego in a box. Not to say our ego isn't a good thing, right? Our ego pushes us to want to win, to want to succeed, to want to excel, to be competitive. Those things are really good qualities. And sometimes we need our ego to actually push us out of our comfort zone. And I would say some women need to actually allow their ego out of their box a little bit. Maybe they're stuck too much in the imposter syndrome. But in all of it, we need to be intentional, and we need to have the control over our ego is really what I'm saying. The control over the ego is the most important factor, as opposed to whether or not we have one, because we do. And then how are we using it? And how is it impacting our decisions and our relationships? And that's where we as women need to make sure that we're very much in control of that ego.
What type of practical advice could you give to our listeners for that, Jamie?
I think it's getting really good at self-assessments, really good at being honest with yourself. I don't think a lot of people like to get negative feedback. I'm a big, champion of, hey, take negative feedback and be open to negative feedback as a gift. If someone is telling you, hey, you come across this way in this meeting, or I didn't like the way that you said that, or they're giving you a reaction to something that you're saying, instead of allowing your ego to sort of flare up and cause continued friction, that's when you say, okay, hold on. I now have information I didn't have before. It may sting, it may not feel good, but I have information I didn't have before that I can use to try to build a relationship with this individual. And we can get nothing done if we don't have strong relationships. And our ego is the thing that's going to impact that.
Absolutely. That's definitely something that I love to explore. And it's something that if you don't take that second to really realize it's there, and as you said, be self-aware of that, it could run roughshod over your life. And all of a sudden you look up and you're like, man, look at what I missed. Look at what I missed in my kid's life. Look at what I missed in my professional life, like my personal life, whatever it may be. And that is one of I felt like a very empowering thing with extreme ownership and the principles of it, of looking around and being like, this is my life and I own it. And no matter what that can be, but that also means that you can make change too. You don't feel like you're stuck. What other thoughts could you give for our listeners along those lines? Because I'm not saying that only women feel this way, but a lot of times we can feel like we're stuck in a rut, whether it's we're driving our kids to school every day at a certain time and we have to pick them up at every time or at this certain time every day, etc. Wherever you are in your professional life, I think there's times that we can feel, for lack of better terms, stuck. What
100%. I think the best advice really comes down to the principle we teach of extreme ownership. And we talked about, hey, controlling your ego and how do we manage our emotions and our ego in these certain circumstances. This is where the power of this idea of extreme ownership for me has been the game changer, because what extreme ownership demands of us is that we look at the circumstances that we're facing, the challenges or problems that we're facing, and we take ownership for the situation. It doesn't mean the sense of like we constantly carry the guilt, right? Women carry that, and sometimes we carry it too much, right? We're so hard on ourselves. But what I found is that what extreme ownership gives me is control. I can control the outcome of the situation. Something bad happened to me, cool. I can control how I respond. I can control my attitude, my emotions in this situation. My ego is flaring up, causing friction. I can control that. I can learn to put that in a box. I'm reacting emotionally to people around me or to certain situations. That is something I can control. I have to work at it, and it's not easy. But if I take ownership of those situations and I recognize the problems and challenges in my life as something that I can take ownership of, it also means I can now control how I respond and ultimately the outcomes. So that's where I think extreme ownership is so powerful. And if I'm feeling stuck in those moments, and trust me, I have been there. I have had those days where I just thought, I feel stuck, or I feel overwhelmed, or I feel like, no one understands what I'm going through. And I've got the rat race of kids and dentists and doctors and groceries and cooking and meals and lunches and all the things that oftentimes women carry the heavy load. What I feel in those moments is that what I can control, the extreme ownership mindset, allows me to control my perspective. So 8 years ago, early in my journey of extreme ownership, when I wasn't nearly as good at it, I would look at those things and I would feel this sense of maybe resentment towards my partner or towards the burden that I had to carry for our household. And now what I've found is that I can control my perspective. Instead of looking at those things like all these things that I have to manage, I look at these things that like, man, look at all the ways I serve my family. Look at all the ways that I take care of my kids. Look at all the ways that I give of myself to support the broader mission of our family unit for my kids, or at Echelon Front, the ways that I give to Echelon Front to serve in our broader mission of helping people understand this mindset of ownership. So that for me is the power of ownership. And the best advice I have is the better you can get at taking ownership, the better control you're going to have in those situations to manage your emotions, to manage your perspective of the situation, to change your perspective, and ultimately manage and take control over the outcomes of those situations.
Absolutely. You brought up the potential resentment, how you manage the household, some of those types of things, which I think definitely is relatable for most women to some certain degree, potentially men as well. But within that, I do remember, I actually think it was a different podcast you were on. You talked about that concept, and you talked about it in the concept of cover and move, of how you're essentially covering for your husband so he'd be able to move in this certain situation. And it's not static, it's ever flowing and ebbing and flowing. Yet if you could touch on that concept, I think that's helpful. That helped my kind of literal mind wrap around that concept of like, can let the resentment go, because really it's a different thought process of you're covering for your spouse so they can move, or vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. So we teach 4 what we call the laws of combat at Echelon Front. And the first one, and the reason it's the first one, is because it's the most important. The other laws don't work if you don't first and foremost focus on this idea of cover and move. Cover and move is fundamentally like a gunfighting tactic. You've seen it in all the military movies you've ever seen. They yell over their shoulder, cover me. But essentially that is 2 people working together to accomplish a mission. And if you think of it in this fictional, gunfight scenario or laser tag, whatever you want to, apply it to, if you and I are on a team and we need to get from point A to point B, and there's, let's just say, an enemy fighter at the other end of that, causing some resistance or some potential conflict for us accomplishing that mission, we have to work together in order to do that. And in order to implement cover and move in this fictional gunfight, you would have to lay down cover fire, which would allow me the opportunity to move. You're laying down cover fire. I get the opportunity to move to get myself to a better position. And once I get situated in that better position, I am now capable of providing cover fire to you, giving you an opportunity to move. And if we work together in this fashion, this leapfrog effect, we can get to where we need to be and we can accomplish the mission. But if at any point in this effort of cover and move, you stop doing your job, you stop providing cover in this scenario in which I'm moving, I am now exposed and in a really bad position. And not only is that bad for me, that's bad for you, because now you don't have a partner in that to provide cover when you need it. So the idea of cover and move is based on this fundamental gunfighting tactic, but the way it plays out in our world, whether it's in business or at home with your family, is simply teamwork. We have to recognize we're a team and we have to work together. And the choices and decisions that I make impact the team. And I have to recognize the impact of the team. Am I providing proper cover so that my partner, whether it's a business partner or your colleagues or subordinates or your spouse, can move and get to where they need to be so that they can provide cover fire for you? And sometimes that means that I'm doing those tasks I mentioned, the dishes and laundry and dentist appointments and all the other things that oftentimes moms take on. But the whole point of that is that me and my partner, my spouse, we are aligned on the overall mission for our family. And so I don't have to look at those things as resentful towards him for not providing in the same exact way, but instead as this is the cover that I can provide that's allowing you to move in the way that you need to move so that ultimately as a team, we can reach the end state. And that does mean that there's some give and take. Sometimes I'm covering for him, sometimes he's covering for me, and it is not equal. It is not an equal share, right? His cover for me may not be in the same exact ways that my cover is for him. All of that is recognizing that we're a team and our relationship and the power of our relationship supersedes everything else. And if we focus on the team and how we can best offer cover to the people around us, we are more likely to get to where we need to be and accomplish the mission, whether that's in your family or in your business. We can't do it without those relationships, and we certainly can't do it without teamwork.
The concept of teamwork and mission, I think, are two that are really important to highlight. I think that translates over any part of life. You know, we can talk about business here, but you're also talking about personal, of the teamwork and really understanding what that mission is and being very clear about that. Are there some practical advice you could give to, I only want to say small business owners, but like if you're looking at a high level of somebody's life, like how do you keep that forefront? You know, is there some thoughts you have around that to say, how do you reinforce this concept, you know, whether it's daily or whatever those practical tips may be of, hey, think about this from the team perspective and then the mission, whether it's the mission of your family or the mission of your company. What thoughts could you give there, Jamie?
Yeah, I think that really starts with a very simple, clear, and concise mission. You have to start with that. So if you're in a business or you're in a relationship and you don't feel like you've had that conversation to align on what is the ultimate long-term strategic goal that we are trying to accomplish, that's your mission. And that needs to be as simple and as clear as you possibly can so that everyone on the team understands the direction that we're heading. And if you do that right, you can tie everything to the mission. So I'll give you an example at Echelon Front. Our mission at Echelon Front, and if you ask anyone on our team, I have full confidence that they'd be able to tell you these three words: impact, reach, and growth. So at Echelon Front, our mission is impact, reach, and growth. That means the team understands what the mission is. Hey, we're going to drive an impact with every single person that we get the benefit of teaching and instructing and working with. And if we do that right, if we impact them, we help them understand these principles and they start to see the impact in their own lives, then guess what? We get to reach more people because they're going to tell people about it. And we get to share this message with more people on a broader level. And if we do those two things really well, we can grow as a company. We can grow as a company. Yes, that's revenue, that's growing, that's reach, whatever it might be. We can grow as a company. But that's a third in our mission. And everyone on our team understands impact, reach, growth. So every decision that we're making, we're assessing that based on our mission. So if we're making a decision that's going to impact the team or impact our services or how we engage with clients, we're asking ourselves, hey, does this help us impact those clients? Does this help us reach more people? And will this help us grow as a company? And everything we're doing should be tracking towards those 3 points of our mission. And the same thing happens in your family. You and your spouse need to be aligned at the top of what is your ultimate goal? What do you want for your children, for your family unit, for your kids when they at some point become an adult? And then the decisions that you're making, if there's misalignment or a disagreement on how we might handle something, we're always going back to that mission. Okay, what is it that we really want? Is this little decision that there's friction over taking away from the ultimate mission? Does it actually impact the ultimate mission in the long term? Or are we getting caught up on something that really is not that big of a deal? Are we caught up on the tactical focus and losing sight of that strategic vision? So it starts with, first and foremost, having a simple mission. Second, ensuring that there is alignment there. Because the only thing that's going to derail that is if me and the other person have different places that we're trying to go. If we're not aligned on what that mission is, as long as there's alignment, there's no scenario, no conflict that we can't climb the ladder of alignment and find where we can align on what the next step is, as long as, again, it's moving us towards that mission. It doesn't, I want to go left, my husband wants to go right. Doesn't really matter as long as the direction we're going is ultimately pointing us back to that broader mission. And that starts with a simple mission and then ensuring alignment across the board.
Those are all solid, like, key topics of conversation. I would say that an underpinning, and you mentioned it even when we first started talking, was, of course, discipline. We definitely know that's built into the ethos of Echelon Front. And then intentionality. Intentionality is something that we talk about a lot. That's where I had to kind of go down to the brass tacks of why we wanted to do what we wanted to do with Colorado Craft Beef. And it really was to be more intentional about how we ranch, how we raise cattle, how we produce beef, and how we fuel people's lives. Like, that was kind of one of our underpinnings, or our mission, or however you want to say. But how would you give advice to somebody to stay disciplined, to stay intentional in their daily life?
Yeah, so the mantra that Jocko uses, that we all steal and use, and has become a mantra for my own life, is discipline equals freedom. And it's the mindset that all the freedoms that we want in our life, whether it's financial freedom, more free time, the freedom physically to do the things that we want to do and be healthy, all of those freedoms are only achieved if we implement discipline, if we're disciplined with our spending and saving, if we're disciplined with our time management, if we're disciplined with how we take care of ourselves, how we, whether it's physically working out or the things that we're putting in our body, nutrition, how are we taking care of ourselves? And all the freedoms that we want come through that discipline. So as a mom and, as a businesswoman, discipline is a very critical part in my life because I got a lot of things going on. And so the only way to manage that is to be very disciplined in the things that I can control. I try to work out every day. I try to eat really healthy and eat really clean so that I can show up in the best way possible for the people around me who are relying on me. So instead of putting myself at the back of that list, I am getting up earlier, getting the workouts in, making sure I'm prioritizing good, healthy nutrition. It's one of the reasons I love Colorado Craft, because what allows me to do is not have to think too much about it. I got a freezer full of really good, clean product that I can pull out and make something nutritious for my family. But it's been awesome because it helps me with that discipline component. I need to take care of myself so that I can show up in the best way possible for the people around me. And that really requires me to first and foremost implement that discipline in every aspect of my life.
Yeah, we were talking offline about that, of like that one less thing that you as a busy mom, busy, professional, etc., has to think about. Yet it makes such a big impact when your body is nourished, when it's fueled. It's amazing how much more effectively you can show up for everybody in your life. And frankly, it was something that I took for granted because I grew up in the middle of nowhere and always had a freezer full of high quality beef. And we really didn't have a whole lot of junk food because you had to drive to go get it. Like, it just wasn't in the freezer. It wasn't around. And now that our society is so connected to everything, it's easy access. I think some of that has become less intentional. Some of those decisions have become less intentional. And that's part of our mission as a company, to bring that back to that intentionality of what you're fueling your body with, knowing where that food comes from, and fueling yourself in really an intentional kind of disciplined manner.
Yeah, 100%. What, we talked about the first law of combat. Our second law of combat is this idea of simple. And the way that I think about simple as it applies to me as a mom is like, hey, what things can you simplify in your life to make being disciplined easier? Because we've got a lot of things we're managing. And so, like I said, I love the simplicity of, cool, I've got Colorado Craft on reorder. It's showing up. I know I always have really good things in my freezer I can pull out. And what's great is that the simplicity of it is I have like a list of recipes that I keep, basically the ingredients that aren't required. Like if I didn't go to the grocery store that day, I know I've got these ingredients, these staples in my pantry with the beef in the freezer that I can pull out and make a really good, healthy meal for my kids and for myself. So the simplicity piece is so important too, whether that's, going out when you can and getting a food service like Colorado Craft, or getting some groceries delivered periodically. Some of those things are so critical. And unfortunately, when we don't have the simple aspect of that, we end up making decisions that aren't in the best interest of ourselves or others. So whatever we can do to simplify that is the best thing possible. And having a freezer full of Colorado Creek has been my way. Having a freezer full of Colorado Craft beef has been my way to simplify my life and make sure that I've always got something on hand in those moments when I'm sort of frantically trying to figure out dinner for the night. It's been a huge way to help me stay disciplined, which again, helps me be better for my kids, helps me be better at Echelon Front.
Love that. Outside of, meal planning, maybe it's a subscription, so you always have, like high quality fuel. What other tips could you give our listeners to help implement simplicity, to help implement discipline?
Well, like I said, I've got kind of a Rolodex of it's probably 12 or 15 standard recipes. Because if you think about it, my kids play sports, we're busy, we're going. And so I've got to have quick ideas of what I can make. And if every day I was waking up like, oh gosh, what's for dinner? Or what do I have? It just wouldn't get done. We'd end up getting, fast food on the way home or ordering takeout or whatever, which is not good for anybody. And so what I've done is I've created about, a Rolodex of 12 to 15 recipes that I basically use on repeat. And they're all recipes my kids will eat. I know that they're healthy. I know that they give them the nutritional value that they're looking for. And they're all things that allow me to basically order the same or go to the grocery store. I get the same ingredients almost every 2 weeks. I've got the beef in the freezer. I've got some other, protein products in the fridge. And I can just kind of run those on repeat. And they don't get boring for the kids because they're seeing one recipe and then seeing again in 2 or 3 weeks and they kind of forgot about it. So I think having a Rolodex of recipes has been huge for my family and has really allowed me to simplify that aspect. And then every Sunday night, I sit down and I have a clipboard in my kitchen that says the weekly meals and I just write them out. And that helps me because on Tuesday when I'm thinking, what am I going to make? I look on the board, I'm like, oh, we're having tacos tonight. And I know I've got the ingredients to make that happen because I pretty much just run the same grocery list and the same meal plan every 2 or 3 week cycle. So that's been super helpful for me.
Yeah, I'm with you. The simplicity is nice. And I'm also one that loves burger. I mean, I've always had great steaks, but man, it's just like that common staple. And you can do so much with ground beef that is wonderful.
There is a million things you can do with ground beef, a million things. Most of my recipes are a ground beef version for sure, because there's a million recipes. If you're ever in a bind, you pull out ground beef in the morning, and by dinner time, you've got 17 different things you could pull out of your back pocket and make for your family. That's going to be great.
Yeah, at least you have something that you can do so much with, and my kids love ground beef, which is even better. So it's not like you have to force feed them. The other thing that I have implemented, especially with my kids are both pretty young, so they snack constantly. It's a continual eating train. That's just what they do. But our beef sticks have been a game changer, that we have mobile protein. Because when you fuel with, snacks that are high sugar or high carb, like that, there's not a whole lot of staying power there, especially when they're trying to fuel their minds in school. So the fact that we've been able to just put a beef stick in their backpack and know that you get hangry, ask your teacher. Grab that beef stick. Be able to kind of simplify your life that way from a snacking perspective has been huge for us.
Yeah, my middle son is our beef stick guy. He's a huge fan. If we're running low, I have to hide them from him because they will be gone. And honestly, what's been helpful for us too is my oldest child can't have dairy for an esophagus issue. It's not an allergy, but we stay away from dairy because of that. And so one of the things that I was struggling with is I try not to use a ton of oil. There's a lot of research, and I'm not an expert on any of this, but there's a lot of people that are like, hey, stay away from seed oils and all these other things. And so I was using butter a lot, only to find out that he can't have dairy and that can impact him. So the beef towel has been huge in our household. I love it, especially for a kid. My oldest is trying to gain weight. He's a wrestler, but he's also plays football and he's trying to get bigger and he's in this like bulking phase. And so the beef towel has been huge because I can just throw extra little bits of that in his meals and it doesn't change the flavor and it gives him a little bit more of that healthy fat. So that's been awesome in our household. One of my favorites.
Awesome. Yeah, I love to hear that. That's one of those things that we moved away from as a society that all of a sudden we're bringing back. We realized that, hey, maybe we were onto something. Our ancestors were onto something, and the simplicity of these ingredients, and moved away. Now we've circled back to where we started, which is really interesting to see.
Well, and here's the trick I've found. You want to talk about simple. I use the spoon to get the beef towel out. I use my, finger to kind of get it off the spoon and into the pan. And then I simply just rub it on my hands. And we've got a nice little, moisturizer for my hands. So it kills two birds with one scoop of beef tallow.
There you go. A 2-in-1.
Yeah.
So Jamie, in light of us really kind of gearing this episode around Women's History Month, what are your thoughts from a female perspective as far as whether it's principles of extreme ownership, some other tips, tricks that you could convey to more specifically our female audience?
Yeah, so what's interesting is it was a couple years ago. If anyone follows Jocko, I have a great relationship with Jocko. I admire him immensely as a leader. He's been a huge teacher to me of what these principles look like. And I have nothing but the utmost respect. And it was a couple years ago, I was asking, it was probably like 6 years ago now. I was asking him and talking to him about, hey, how do we get more women to engage in our content? And maybe we should look at doing like a separate type of event or a separate, a thing at our muster events to get women engaged. And the answer that he gave me in the moment wasn't very satisfying, which was a rare occurrence for me and Jocko, because usually everything he's saying, it's like gold and I'm writing it down. He's the leadership black belt, right? And his answer to me that felt unsatisfying in the moment was, hey, it's all the same. It's all the same. And I remember going back to my room that night and thinking, like, he doesn't get it. He just doesn't get it. He doesn't understand that my experience as a woman is vastly different than his experience in a man, whether it's in business or in the home. And I had that feeling of like, he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. And I went the next day and I was listening to him speak, and I'd heard this speech many, many times before, but I realized as he was talking what he meant by that. What he meant was the same principles apply. He was not saying my experience is not different. And he wasn't dismissing the fact that my experience was different. What he was saying is that the same principles of extreme ownership apply to women, to men in different industries, at home, in business. It didn't matter. The same principles apply. So that was something that I had to wrap my head around. And I realized when he said that he was right. Now, in the years since, he also realized that we needed to target women and help women understand that these principles were for them. So we've done a lot in the last couple of years to open this up and build a community where women felt like these principles were in fact for them, because they come from combat that put up a little bit of a barrier for some women of entry of like, I don't know, it's combat stuff. I don't really know if I can get on board with that. So we've done a lot to help women understand that these principles are a game changer. When you think about what we teach, cover and move, it's building relationships and working together as a team. Simple, having a simple mission, communicating in a way that's effective with the people around us. Prioritize and execute. We have a million things we're trying to manage on a day-to-day, especially working moms. We have to manage those things. And in order to prioritize those effectively, we have to detach from our emotions. And the last of the 4 laws of combat, decentralized command, we have to empower the people around us to solve problems and take ownership of situations. And we have to give them that ownership to contribute in that mission. So when I think about what we teach, if you remove the combat, if that's a barrier for women, all of these same principles apply to how we solve problems. And any problem that you bring to me, man or woman, we can look at those situations and say, okay, how's your relationship? Is it simple? Is the plan clear to the team? Are you detached from your emotion or ego, or is that driving some of your decision making? And have you engaged with the right people, delegated effectively, or empowered them to contribute in solving this problem? All of those problems are leadership problems. They can be solved through leadership. And I think women, we have an incredible community of women who are coming and sharing their experiences in the power of what ownership has given them and what these principles have given them, which is, again, that control to solve those problems in their life, to solve those problems through leadership. So I think for women in general, as we celebrate women, I think about the leaders in my life that have had the biggest impact on me. It's been the women in my life. It's been these incredible women around me who are showing me through their example what leadership really looks like. Even if they weren't necessarily in a leadership role, they're showing me what leadership looks like through the ways that they engage with me, mentored me, gave me examples of what good leadership looks like. And women are incredible leaders and need to feel empowered to impact the people around them and to step up into those leadership roles when they come. And I'm not talking the traditional title of leadership. I'm talking about the everyday leadership and influence that we have. They need to feel empowered to step up and to lead effectively in those ways. And they can do that when they apply the laws of combat and extreme ownership effectively.
I couldn't agree more. Specifically to the female audience, I was privileged enough to be able to attend Women's Assembly last fall. So that's something, if you're looking at from a female perspective, to be able to have a group of like-minded women in one room. Highly recommend that. That's in October this year, correct, Jamie?
Yep, in Phoenix. And we just launched that. So it's now open for tickets.
Perfect. All of the EF events are wonderful, man, woman alike, but that one specifically from a female perspective, that's definitely a go-to. And I'm excited to be able to go again this fall and be able to take our team as well.
Love it.
That's been probably one of the most enlightening things about like Jeff and I's entrepreneurial journey has been the people, the other people, to bring them along into the fold, to just have exposure to things like everything that Echelon Front teaches. But, we both had corporate careers prior to this, and we had exposure to extreme ownership, but it is different when it's at this deep of a level too, from a true business perspective, and then seeing how it translates into all parts of your life and taking the control of your own life, putting that control on yourself, understanding where your ego's at play. A lot of the details that sometimes we lost the intentionality of thinking about these things, and each time we go to an EF event, it brings that back up, and then we're able to share that with our team, and then it can snowball from there. I see our team interacting differently even in their personal lives, not necessarily just in their professional lives, and as you mentioned earlier, that impact is huge. So huge fan, big believer. And if any ladies want more information on assembly or other EF events, we'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The Women's Assembly has been a huge honor for me to get to engage with so many women who are applying these principles in so many different capacities. And what's reinforcing, you said it yourself, like, hey, every time you're on site with an event, it reinforces the power of these principles. You're not alone. I've been here 11 years. Every event that I am at, every time I get an interview, podcast opportunity like this, or I'm speaking at a client engagement, every time I speak about these principles and talk about it, it reinforces for me the power of what these principles give me. And I can tell you, in my 11 years at Echelon Front, these principles have changed my life. I'm a better wife, a better mother, a better friend, a better boss, a better follower. I am a better person as a result of these principles. And so I love the opportunity to open the door to men and women, but certainly to women who I think are, kind of carrying the world on their shoulders, whether they're a stay-at-home mom or working without kids, or they're like me, they're doing both. They carry a lot of weight, and they're so critical to teams and organizations across the board, and they're so critical in the home. And so I love when we get an opportunity to help women understand how these principles can impact their lives in the same way that it has impacted every aspect of my life.
Absolutely. Jamie, I'd love to take a second to have some kind of personal reflections, not necessarily specifically with CCB, but of course, that's kind of our shared level here with connection back to food, ranching, this type of way of life. I have a few of my own kind of personal reflections on this when I think about the principles of extreme ownership. I reflect on what I wanted to teach my kids before we decided to have children. And the only way I knew to teach them that was for them to be involved in this way of life. Because the high level of ownership of having a live critter relying on you for their life, it's like, I don't know if you get a whole lot more ownership or responsibility, whatever you want to say, from that. So that was like my frame of reference, especially before being in the fold of EF, was there's no bigger level of ownership than being like, this animal relies on me for life. I am its caretaker, and it's my responsibility to make sure that it thrives, and I take care of it with respect and nurture it, etc. So that's, I'd say, one of my reflections of, we're talking about ownership and the EF concept, tying it back to whether it's ranching, where food comes from, etc. I'd love to hear your reflections.
I think the biggest thing that I reflect on regularly at Echelon Front and as a mom, I think you're totally right. My role as a mom is what I consider to be my greatest leadership responsibility. It's also my greatest leadership challenge, right? I'm every day getting challenged by these little knuckleheads who I love more than anything to practice what we teach. And there's been a saying, and if you can't read it, but there's a board behind me that just has a bunch of quotes. And they're little things that over the years I hear and I think, okay, I want to remember that. That was critical. That was important. But there's one that's right in the middle of that. And it's very clear. It says, do the right things for the right reasons, and you will win in the end. And that is something that I regularly reflect on. Am I doing the right things? And am I doing them for the right reasons? Not about me, about the team, about the people around me, about my children, about their progress or growth. And if I'm doing those things, I feel confident that I will win in the end. And sometimes I have to go back, and if you saw it on my board, you'd see in the end is underlined, because I have to remind myself it's not always immediate. You don't always see these things play out in that immediate. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you take ownership and you're amazed when someone around you takes ownership and you're like, well, cool, we solved that problem. And you get that little hit of like, that worked. But oftentimes, and particularly with my family and my kids, I have to remember that it's in the end, meaning there's a long journey of doing the right things for the right reasons to get to the victory. And it may take a while. And I'll give you one example recently that kind of gives you a glimpse of the end. It's not the end for sure, but like that little glimpse of, I guess, hope you can call it. My kids have grown up around this content. My oldest, we use this content all the time in the way that we help him or try to help him solve problems, whether it's at school or with a teacher, with a friend, a girlfriend, whatever it might be. He hears us talk about these things constantly. He hears the language all the time. And he's quick to point out when I'm not doing the things that we teach. And there was a recent incident, and I had to basically shut down a plan that he had in place that I had originally agreed to, and then we had to kind of pivot, right? That happens. And I can anticipate that a 16-year-old is going to be frustrated by that. And he was. And he was responding in a way that showed me he was frustrated, and he was being kind of sarcastic and being a little bit of like, let's just call it, he was being a turd. And I simply took ownership of it, and I apologized. I said, hey, I didn't understand the initial plan. That's my fault. I know you got excited, and I took full ownership of it. And I waited, I didn't even wait. I just figured that was it. About 30 minutes later, he sent me a text and he said, Mom, I'm really sorry for being a jerk. I shouldn't have responded that way. I need to do a better job communicating. That's on me. And he took ownership of it. And then what was so mind blowing was about 20 minutes after that, he sent me another text that said, the stuff you teach works. I've never really done it on my own, but I had that moment where I said, okay, if I detach and I take ownership, I can solve this problem. And now I feel better. This is a 16-year-old boy recognizing the power of taking ownership in his life and how it makes him feel. That cool, I solved that problem. I just still didn't get what I wanted, but I solved the problem and I feel better now. So for me, I hinge greatly on the do the right things for the right reasons and you will win in the end. And I think your business is such a good example of that. You came out of the gate and said, hey, we want to do something. And you decided, hey, this is the mission that we're going to accomplish. And it was for the right reasons. And you're doing the right things to accomplish that. And in the end, you will win, even if it takes a little while to get there. So whether it's with your kids or your business, that has been a huge thing for me that I have self-reflected on daily. Am I doing the right things and am I doing them for the right reasons? And if I am, I think there's victory at the end of that effort.
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful. I mean, it's so wonderful to have these victories in our professional life, but the fulfillment in your personal life, it's like another level.
Nothing like it. Nothing like it.
There also is not a better teacher. I mean, I didn't realize like all of the refining that needed to be done. And then I was sent 2 children and I was like, oh, there it is. There's all the refinement that's about to happen.
Well, and I just want to caveat, for as much of a win as that interaction was with my 16-year-old, 2 days later, he woke up in a bad mood and couldn't find his lacrosse gloves and had an attitude. And you know what? I responded to him in kind and we had a little friction. And then I said, oh, we got to start all over again. So it's not the big wins and then you're done. I could have walked away from that conversation like my job as a mom is done, check mark. He's arrived. But it's human nature, just like the people that we work with every day. 2 days later, he was kind of back into what you would expect from a 16-year-old. And I had to once again recognize, okay, we got to just keep with it. Do the right things for the right reasons, apply these principles, we can solve this. And it's a never ending effort. And I think that for some people is the hard part. Like it's a campaign and it's a daily effort to do these things effectively. But man, you get these little glimpses of excitement. And to your point, the stuff with your kids and your family is so much more rewarding. When those things happen, it's like nothing compares to how exciting that is when you get those little moments, knowing that 2 days later, it might all go out the window and you're starting over. That's okay. We're on the path. It's a long time effort.
Well, recognizing that, reflecting on it, and as you said, you took a step back and were like, oh, okay, let's reset. That's so powerful. That is incredibly powerful. And I'll just speak from a mom perspective for a second, but like being able to come to my kids and, whether you call it repair, whatever, be like, hey, that interaction wasn't exactly like I anticipated, even though, they're 3 and they're 5. And you can see that. You can see them be like, oh, hey, it's okay to not be perfect too. And it's okay to kind of, reset. It's take ownership for what you did. And they see that they and then they mirror it. And, like I say, even if they don't do it tomorrow, like that's a win. That's a victory to continue on that path. So.
Yeah, I've gotten to the point with my kids where I almost see it as much as it sometimes stings, I see it as a win when I have to take ownership when I screw up, because that means that I'm giving them an example of what that looks like. And I'm reinforcing for them that they're not perfect and they're going to make mistakes. And even me, who's out there preaching and teaching extreme ownership constantly and detaching from your emotions, I can get caught up in the chaos and stress of a home life. And I don't always do that. I'm pretty good, but I have moments. And so I think taking those opportunities to, maybe it's apologizing, but it's more so just taking ownership when I screw up, reinforces for them that, hey, you're not going to be perfect. But when you make a mistake, you can take ownership and you can move forward with that individual is so powerful. So instead of seeing it as like, oh, I have to go say sorry now, or that like somehow I'm going to lose their respect, I see it now as this is an opportunity to show them the way. So go take ownership when you screw up. It's like no big deal. Cool. Hey, I screwed that up. I want you to learn how to regulate your emotions, which means I have to show you what that looks like. And I didn't do that well this morning. That's my fault. Here's what I'm going to do next time. And you show them the path, which is so much more valuable than telling them what you want them to do and then not doing that on the back end. Your actions are far more important than the words that you say.
Absolutely. That leading by example is huge. I I didn't recognize that as much when I was younger as I do now, because I had some individuals in my life that would say the right thing, but not necessarily do the right thing. And the more that I reflected on that, the more I was like, oh, that's what matters. When you lead by that example, that means a whole lot more than the words coming out of your mouth.
Yeah, people either learn what good leadership looks like from good people, good leaders in their life that set the example, or bad leaders. They see what bad leaders do and they see how it impacts them and the people around them. And they say, I don't want to be like that. And so the goal is for all of us to be the good example of a human being who makes mistakes, but takes ownership and solves problems and manages our emotions and does all these things. So be the good example so that we don't someday become the example where people are like, yeah, I don't want to be like that. And we don't want to be the bad example that teaches people what good leadership should actually look like.
I think that's one of the goals as a mom, isn't it? Like you don't want to be the bad example. You want to be the good example. When your children look back in 20 years and reflect and they're like, oh, all right. Yeah.
And the good example makes a ton of mistakes.
Yeah.
The good example makes a ton of mistakes and fails all the time. But that good example takes ownership when they do and shows them a path for what that looks like.
For sure. Well, Jamie, let's have a couple closing questions. If you could highlight one leadership lesson you wish more people understood, what would you say that is?
Hands down, extreme ownership. That mindset is a game changer. And if you can create the instinct to look at problems and challenges in your life and say, hey, there's no one else to blame. There's no excuses here that I'm going to make. I'm going to take full ownership of this problem and I'm going to take ownership of solving it. That is a massive game changer. And it's not about anyone else. It's about you. And when you take ownership, you get to control the outcome.
For sure. So what books, resources, tools would you recommend for somebody on their leadership journey?
Obviously, I would always start with Extreme Ownership. It's one of my favorite books. I've read it multiple times. There's a follow-on book that I use as kind of my everyday guide that Jocko wrote called Leadership Strategy and Tactics. And it's short, really simple, to the point answers to questions or problems that you might be finding. And then Echelon Front, we have a lot of really cool resources and things that you can participate in, whether it's online training in our academy or it's events like the muster or the women's assembly that you mentioned earlier, as well as a ton of free resources. We have 1 million articles on a myriad of different leadership questions. So if you have questions, you can go in there and type something in and it's going to pull up a bunch of articles from all of our instructors on that topic. So a lot of good resources there. All of my leadership lessons of late are Echelon Front material. So it's Extreme Ownership, Dichotomy of Leadership, the books that we wrote. They've been a game changer for me. So I would point people in that direction.
Would the website be the best place to find those, Jamie?
Yep, echelonfront.com. You can find it all there.
Very good. And we'll include that in the show notes as well. So everybody will have access to that. Any other closing thoughts, Jamie?
I'll just go back to that, what I reflected on earlier. When you take ownership in your life, you get to control the outcome. And ultimately, as leaders, whether it's in business or at home, with our families, our ultimate team, if we focus on doing the right things for the right reasons, you will win in the end. And all of that starts with taking ownership of the problems and challenges that we're facing.
For sure. Thank you, Jamie. So as we wrap up today's episode, I want to thank Jamie for her incredible insight into leadership, ownership, and building resilience in every area of your life. Whether you're running a business, leading a team, or making choices for your family, the power of taking full responsibility is life-changing. Today's conversation resonated with you. Be sure to follow Jamie and the work she's doing with Echelon Front. Visit them online. Don't forget to subscribe to Steak Bites for more conversations to fuel your mind and your legacy. So stay inspired, stay intentional, keep fueling your legacy with purpose. Thank you for tuning into Steak Bites. Till next time.